Hey everyone. Adolescents belonging to the age group 15 to 24 makes 31% of the total AIDS population in India. Sexual abuse and physical violence against transgenders are increasing at an alarming rate. Yet in India, we continue with the traditional syllabus of the description of reproductive organs included in the 10th and 12th grade of academics as the only way of imparting sex education. The word sex itself is considered as a taboo, and gender-inclusive sex education seems to be a distant reality, where the sexual and gender minorities are afraid to come out of the closets and express their original sexual orientations and gender identity. Sex education in India is often limited to the academic circles, and for most, it is the description of reproductive organs and brief discussions about STDs and STIs is the highest knowledge. The sexual minorities were rejected and transgenders are seen as evil or wretched. It is seen as a disease, often a psychic disorder, or a curse influence on a family to produce one which is a mixture of the recognized binary sexes or gender. The difference between sex and gender itself appears in academic circles when the syllabus mentions about minority rights and gender studies. Yet this inclusion is complicated. In colleges, sex education appears as an open course or as an optional course, and in some universities, it is not even part of the syllabus. Many of them do not discuss about puberty, safe sex, consent, and other related topics. Sex education is often heteronormative, and the sexual minorities are always pushed to the borders. They find it difficult to fit into any of the major ones, only to be rejected, isolated, and bullied by their parents and family. The gender and sexual minorities are often referred as abnormal in a heteronormative society. The binary construction of the masculine and feminine or the dominant and submissive becomes a cultural narrative if we acknowledge these varied forms. Often, transphobia and homophobia has resulted in isolation and rejection of the minorities, spreading misconceptions about lesbians, gays, bisexuals, transgenders, queers, intersexuals, asexuals, and other variants. The lack of sensitization about LGBTQ concerns among such youths affect the teenagers that are diverted to substance abuse, physical violence, and other crimes, who often intend to do these things to express their insecurities, which often disrupts their normal lives and the societal norms. LGBTQ students are at a higher risk of being affected with depression, suicide, isolation, etc. than their heterosexual peers. Both in urban and rural India, this is a phenomenon which should be considered while we intend to create an inclusive sex education. According to Gleason Report 2019, in the US, around 59.1% of the LGBTQ students felt unsafe at school because of their sexual orientation, around 42% due to their gender expression, and around 37.4% due to their gender identity. Only 8.2% of students reported to receive LGBTQ inclusive sex education. The most effective and viable tool in order to sensitize children about gender and sexuality is the introduction of an inclusive sex education curriculum. In 2018, the UNESCO published the International Technical Guidance on Sexuality Education, which advocates for a comprehensive sexuality education that promotes health and well-being, respect for gender equality and human rights, and encourage young adults to lead healthy, safe, and productive lives. However, the existence of strong stigma and controversy prevents the inculcation of healthy conversations regarding sexual life and sexual health. Indian society still believes that sex education is against the culture and is pervasive. The deep-rooted sense of morality binds the sentiment of a large population from seeing the benefits and necessities of an inclusive sex education. This was visible by the backlash faced when the adolescent education program was initiated in 2008. 13 states opposed this initiative as they argued that sex education will lead to risky sexual behavior and promiscuity. Similar reactions can be expected from religious organizations and institutions, as the relationship between LGBTQ community and religion is a complicated one. Historically, many Orthodox religions treated LGBTQ people very harshly. There is also no organized facility to carry out detailed researches or surveys for the uplift of LGBTQ community, especially in schools and colleges. Moreover, teachers and parents might not be willing to include such diverse topics and introduce them to children. There were several incidents in other countries where parents protested against schools giving inclusive sex education. Protesters often argue that including LGBTQ content would be disrespectful to some religions and expose children to inappropriate topics. They argue that including homosexuality would prevent the parents' right to control what their children are exposed to and would make them confused. Even though the situations are unfavorable, the collective effort of teachers, parents, health professionals, local communities, NGOs, and governments can make inclusive sex education a reality. We need to acknowledge that the youth has a lot of access to information, even though they might not be precise and accurate. And the society is becoming more acceptable towards the LGBTQ community. Similarly, we need to normalize having open conversations regarding sexual life. We need to broaden our perspectives. We need to understand that not all are heterosexual and cisgender, and it's perfectly normal to be whatever you are. We also need to understand that learning about sexual life and relationships is as equal and important as any other subjects that are taught. Secondly, there must be a thorough change in the syllabus. Rather than sticking on to the typical reproductive lessons, we need to be much more diverse. It is essential that the youth understand the difference between sex and gender. They need to know what sexual orientations, gender identity, gender expressions, and why gender pronouns matter. And while discussing about puberty, we need to address the concern of transgender students. Sexual life, practices, and relationships can be different for people from different orientations. So while discussing about healthy relationships, it must be useful for all. We also need to teach about pregnancy, birth control, STDs, STIs, contraception, and various other aspects. There should also be facilities outside colleges and schools for contraceptive measures. Rather than completing the curriculum within a 2 or 3 hour session, which we normally do, sex education should be seen as a continuous process. Perhaps it could be taught from the beginning of the academic year itself, and the syllabus can be more diverse and creative. There should be programs for parents so that they are not left out from the process, and teachers require the experience, resources, and information so that they can be more supportive towards LGBTQ students. It must be ensured that a permanent counselor is appointed in every schools and colleges. LGBTQ students deserve a secure environment so that they can come out whenever they are comfortable to. Groups like Gender and Sexuality Alliances or GSAs, which are running actively in schools and colleges of other countries, can be introduced over here too. There should also be a helpline service that offers non-judgmental listening to people in crisis. The Trevor Helpline, which is run by the Trevor Project, is the first nationwide 24/7 suicide and crisis prevention helpline service in the US for the LGBTQ youth. The Trevor Project offers wide-range support for LGBTQ youth globally. Hence, it is essential that such a helpline service is introduced in our country also. And these services can be coordinated in similar ways that the Childline Helpline is being operated under the Ministry of Women and Child Development. There is a cause for starting sex education at a young age, as early as even kindergarten. The conversations need to be just about the body parts, the good touch and the bad touch, and stories with two dads and two moms. This can get controversial, but it's high time we step out of the conventional teaching methods. Studies show that having conversations at an earlier age reduces the risk of falling victim to false information. It also helps to reduce the chances of being victim to sexual abuse. When we start normalizing having conversations regarding sexuality and gender, connecting it with respect, consent, safety, and love, we are working with a chance that this generation will make for healthier choices. Inclusive teaching is an affirmation that you exist and your identity is valid. It is not just about lesbian, gay, bi, and trans people. It's crucial that people realize that there is no hierarchy in teaching. And LGBTQ people, and particularly the youth, should be ensured that they see themselves reflected in the lessons and that they gain more authentic and complex information and the understanding of the world around them. A study conducted by the World Health Organization titled Effects of Sex Education on Young Adults' Sexual Behavior has shown that receiving sex education do not encourage youth to have sex at an earlier age or more frequently. On the contrary, it shows that it delays the start of sexual activity, reduces having unprotected sex, and encourages people to have safer sex. Introducing groups like Gender and Sexuality Alliances that provide support for the LGBTQ youth will help us to reduce victimization to bullying and isolation due to sexual orientations and gender identity. Inclusive sex education and having honest conversations about gender and sexuality will help us to make aware about the stereotypes. Queer people's identity are validated. Questioning youth are given the space to explore their identities, and straight cis youth are given the chance to interact responsibly and advocate for their peers. So that's all I got to say, and thank you so much.